Have you ever watched someone get humiliated in public, and the person doing it had absolutely no idea they were destroying their own life in real time? That's exactly what happened at the Harlow Grand Hotel in downtown Charlotte, North Carolina. And I have to warn you, by the end of this story, your jaw is going to drop. Let me tell you about Calvin Osei. Calvin Osei was 34 years old, a quiet, broad-shouldered black man with close-cropped hair going slightly gray at the temples. Not from age, but from years of carrying more weight than most people ever will. He drove a 7-year-old Honda Civic with a cracked side mirror. He wore on this particular Tuesday morning in October a faded navy hoodie, dark jeans, and a pair of worn New Balance sneakers he'd owned for 3 years. He carried no briefcase, no laptop bag, nothing but a small spiral notebook and a cheap ballpoint pen tucked into his front pocket. To anyone watching him walk through the revolving glass doors of the Harlow Grand, he looked like someone who had wandered in from the wrong side of town. That was, of course, exactly what someone decided. Her name was Beverly Stanton, 51 years old, white, the general manager of the Harlow Grand Hotel. A position she had held for 9 years and wore like a crown. Beverly was tall, sharply dressed in a charcoal blazer and ivory blouse, her blonde hair pinned back with the kind of precision that communicated one thing above all else. "I run this place, and don't you forget it." She had a reputation among her staff, not a good one. She had fired 3 front desk clerks in the past 2 years for what she called failing to maintain standards. What her staff called it behind closed doors was something else entirely. Beverly was standing near the concierge desk when Calvin walked in. She watched him cross the marble lobby, watched him look up at the chandelier, a cascade of hand-blown glass that cost more than most people's cars. With quiet, unhurried eyes, watched him walk toward the front desk. Something in Beverly Stanton tightened. "Excuse me." She stepped forward before the front desk clerk, a young woman named Deja, could even open her mouth. Beverly positioned herself between Calvin and the desk like a wall. "Can I help you with something?" Calvin looked at her. He had the kind of stillness about him that some people mistake for slowness. He wasn't slow. He was simply a man who had learned, a long time ago, that reacting is a choice. "I'm here for a meeting," he said. Beverly's eyes moved over him. The hoodie, the sneakers, the spiral notebook. "What kind of meeting?" she asked. "A private one." She let a beat of silence pass, the kind designed to make someone uncomfortable. "Sir, this is a 5-star hotel. Our conference facilities are reserved for guests and approved business partners. If you're looking for the convention center, it's about east on." "I know where the convention center is," Calvin said. Quiet, no edge in his voice. "Just a fact." Beverly stiffened. "Then I'm going to need you to clarify your business here because I don't have a record of. His name is Calvin Osei." The voice came from behind Beverly. She turned. Thomas Whitmore, 62, silver-haired, the regional director of Whitmore Capital Group, wearing a suit that cost more than Beverly made in a month, was walking across the lobby with his hand already extended. "Mr. Osei." Thomas shook Calvin's hand warmly. 2 hands, the kind of handshake that communicates genuine respect. "We've been waiting for you. The board is already upstairs." Beverly went very still. Calvin looked at her once more. He didn't smile. He didn't say a word. He simply nodded slightly, the barest acknowledgement, and followed Thomas Whitmore toward the elevator. Beverly stood in the middle of her marble lobby and felt something cold move through her chest. But she didn't know yet. Not really. She thought maybe she'd made a small mistake. Misjudged a guest. It happened. She'd smooth it over somehow. She had no idea what she had just done. Let me back up, because you need to understand who Calvin Osei actually is. Calvin grew up in West Charlotte, the second of 4 children raised by a single mother, Dolores Osei, who worked double shifts at a laundry facility for 18 years. They rented a house on Pembroke Avenue that had a leak in the kitchen ceiling and a furnace that gave out every February. Calvin wore hand-me-down clothes from his older brother until he was 16. He knew early what it felt like to walk into a room and have people look at him like he didn't belong. He also knew early that the feeling meant nothing. What mattered was what you built. By the time Calvin was 22, he had saved $11,000 working construction summers and nights at a FedEx distribution center while finishing a finance degree at UNC Charlotte. He took that $11,000 and made one investment, a small rental property on the east side, a duplex that needed work but had good bones. He fixed it himself, on weekends, with tools he borrowed from his uncle. By 27, he owned 4 properties. By 30, 14. By 34, the age he was on this Tuesday morning in October, Calvin Osei was the founder and majority stakeholder of Osei Capital Partners, a private real estate investment firm that managed a portfolio valued at $340 million across 6 states. He still drove the Honda Civic. He still wore the same kind of clothes he'd worn growing up. Not because he couldn't afford anything different, because he didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone. His mother had taught him that a man's worth wasn't in what he wore, it was in what he built. He had built quite a lot, and the Harlow Grand Hotel, as it turned out, was one of the things he'd built, or rather, one of the things he now owned. Because 3 weeks prior, Whitmore Capital Group had finalized a deal to acquire the Harlow Grand and 2 other Charlotte properties. Calvin Osei was the lead private investor in that acquisition, holding a 38% equity stake in the deal. This morning's board meeting, the one Beverly Stanton had tried to redirect him away from, was the first official meeting of the hotel's new ownership group. Beverly didn't know any of this, because Beverly Stanton did not Google things before she decided who belonged in her lobby. The meeting lasted 2 hours. 12 people sat around a mahogany table on the 14th floor of the hotel. The same hotel Beverly had managed for 9 years, the same hotel whose chandelier cost more than her car, the same hotel she had told herself, in private, she practically owned through sheer force of dedication. Thomas Whitmore opened the meeting by introducing the ownership group. When he reached Calvin, he said simply, "Calvin Osei, lead investor, 38% equity. Without his commitment, this acquisition doesn't happen." There were handshakes around the table, legal documents, discussion of transition timelines, staff reviews, operational changes. At one point, someone asked Calvin directly what his vision was for the property. Calvin set down his cheap ballpoint pen. "I want this hotel to be the kind of place where anyone who walks through the front door is treated like they belong there," he said, "regardless of what they look like, regardless of what they're wearing. That's the standard I hold. I'd like it to be the standard here." No one knew yet what had happened in the lobby. No one except Thomas Whitmore, who had watched it from 30 feet away while stepping off the elevator, and who had said nothing during the meeting, because he understood instinctively that this was not his moment to speak. It was mid-afternoon when Thomas came downstairs and found Beverly in her office. He knocked. She looked up from her desk with the composed, professional expression she had perfected over years. "Thomas, is the meeting finished? I wanted to come up and introduce myself to the—" "I need to talk to you about this morning," Thomas said. He sat down. He told her quietly and without theater exactly who Calvin Osei was: the firm, the portfolio, the equity stake, the fact that Calvin was now, functionally, one of the most significant stakeholders in the building she managed. Beverly's face did something complicated. The color shifted. Her hands, resting on the desk, became very still. "I didn't," she started. "You told him," Thomas said, "that if he was looking for the convention center, it was 4 blocks east." Silence. "Beverly." Thomas leaned forward slightly. "I've been in business for 30 years. I have watched people make exactly this mistake, and I will tell you what I always tell them. The most dangerous assumption you can ever make is that you know someone's worth by looking at them." Beverly opened her mouth, closed it. "He's calling for a full staff review as part of the transition," Thomas continued. "I wanted you to hear this from me first." The staff review took 3 weeks. It was thorough. HR consultants were brought in. Exit interviews were conducted with former employees, including the 3 front desk clerks Beverly had fired. Patterns emerged. Not just one incident, but a documented history of Beverly making judgment calls based on appearance, on perceived status, on assumptions that had no place in a hospitality environment. One former employee, a young black woman who had worked the morning desk for 2 years before Beverly let her go, submitted a written statement that said, "I was told, more than once, to use my judgment about which guests needed to be approached and which ones needed to be directed. I understood what that meant. I didn't feel I had a choice." Calvin read every document. He didn't make the call publicly. He didn't make it dramatically. On a Thursday afternoon, Beverly Stanton received a certified letter informing her that her contract as general manager of the Harlow Grand Hotel would not be renewed as part of the transition to new ownership, effective in 30 days. She had 9 years in that building. She had chosen one Tuesday morning to spend 30 seconds of them deciding that a man in a navy hoodie didn't belong in her lobby. 30 seconds, 9 years. Deja, the young front desk clerk Beverly had stepped in front of, heard about what happened and cried in the break room. Not from sadness, but from the accumulated weight of every morning she had watched Beverly do exactly that to exactly those people and felt powerless to say anything, and now, finally understood that someone had seen it. She kept her job. All the front desk staff kept their jobs. The new general manager, a 40-year-old Haitian-American woman named Rochelle Fontaine, came with 20 years of hospitality experience and a management philosophy she stated plainly in her first staff meeting. "I don't care if someone walks in here wearing a garbage bag. You treat them like a guest. That's our job. That's our only job." The staff meeting, 3 weeks into Rochelle's tenure, had the longest voluntary attendance in hotel history. Calvin Osei never spoke publicly about what happened in the lobby. He didn't post about it, didn't give interviews, didn't make Beverly Stanton a story. When Thomas Whitmore, over dinner a month later, brought it up and said he still couldn't believe she'd done that she'd looked at Calvin and just assumed. Calvin shrugged and picked up his glass. "People see what they decide to see," he said. "I learned a long time ago that's not my problem to carry." Thomas shook his head. "Doesn't it bother you?" Calvin thought about it honestly. "What bothers me," he said, "is that she probably did it to 50 people before me who didn't have an equity stake in the building. Those are the people I think about. They walked out feeling like they didn't belong somewhere. That bothers me a lot more than anything she said to me." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "That's why I wanted you in this deal," he said finally. Calvin set down his glass. Outside the restaurant window, Charlotte moved through its evening, lights coming on in towers, headlights on rain-slick streets, a city that looked different depending entirely on where you were standing and what you had decided to see. He thought about Pembroke Avenue, the leaking ceiling, the February furnace, his mother, Dolores, getting up at 4:45 in the morning in the dark. He thought about the chandelier in the lobby of the Harlow Grand, hand-blown glass. Beautiful, if you took the time to look up. "You ready?" Thomas asked. "Yeah," Calvin said. He picked up his spiral notebook, the same cheap one from that morning, and tucked it in his pocket. "Let's go. Here's what I want you to take away from Calvin's story. Beverly Stanton didn't lose her job because she was rude to a powerful man. She lost it because she had spent years operating from a belief that she could look at a person, their clothes, their skin, their car, and know exactly what they were worth. That belief cost her everything. But more than that, it cost dozens of ordinary people something too. People who had no equity stake in anything. People who just wanted to buy a car or check into a hotel or walk into a room without being told, in 100 quiet ways, that they didn't belong. That's the part that should stay with you. Respect isn't a strategy you apply to people who might turn out to be important. It's a standard you hold for everyone who walks through the door. Because you don't know their story, and more importantly, you don't need to. If this story hit you the way it hits me every time I tell one like it, drop a comment below. Tell me about a time you were underestimated. Tell me you've been the person walking into that lobby. This community shows up for each other in the comments, and I read every single one. If you're new here, welcome to Dale Stories. Hit subscribe and the bell because I post new stories every week and you do not want to miss what's coming next. And if you know someone who needs to hear Calvin's story today, share it. Sometimes the right story at the right moment changes the way someone sees the world, or at the very least, the way they see who's walking through their door.